Hi, today I'm working on the NuTone 2051-2054 Master Rebuild. Got it here on the workbench, and I'm going to show you how to disassemble and take the chassis out of the faceplate. So this is a painted metal faceplate, and the first step is to take the knobs off. There's just two, and they just slide off. We'll put those aside to be cleaned, and then we'll flip it around. And there's not too much to do on this. I've disconnected the two wires off the back of the speaker cone. It's always good to mark on the speaker cone. You have a black wire and a green wire to mark, to index it. So I've made a black mark here on the terminal strip to indicate where the black wire goes in case they get untwisted or moved around and you don't remember how it's supposed to go. You can also always just take a picture of it. And then the only thing that holds the chassis into the faceplate there are a bunch of little half-inch size nuts. There's one that goes on a threaded stud here. There's one down here. There's one on this side. And then there is this metal plate that I've already taken off. It slides down over this capacitor, and there's two knurled nuts on these studs here, which I've already taken all those off. Once you get all the knurled nuts removed, all you have to do is slide the chassis off the threaded studs, and there it is. So we'll take the faceplate and put it aside, and let me show you the chassis just a little bit. So I showed in the previous video about the overview of this model. I've already taken the 5 vacuum tubes out of their sockets, and we'll be putting those in at the very end. You can see how with the chassis out, access to the components is very good. You can also see how really dirty this is. It's not uncommon. You have a lot of dust buildup from it being in the wall for the last 50 or more years. So first step is to clean the chassis and then replace the tubular capacitors, and I think there's one electrolytic in here, and then we have to replace this big multi-section can capacitor right here, which will be somewhat of a challenge because the new one is this, and it's a little bit, just a little bit taller, which is not much of a problem, but it is a larger diameter than the original one. This was as close as I could find. Fortunately, or unfortunately I should say, it doesn't quite fit through the hole in the shield, and that's going to be somewhat of an issue because this needs to be in place by the time I'm done. So we're going to have to enlarge this to accommodate this. And then also we have to make sure that because of a little bit of extra height, it's not a lot, that it doesn't interfere with the switch box assembly that's part of the wall housing. So this will be the majority of the work on this, is to get this connected up properly and mounted onto the chassis. We'll have to see how the tabs line up with the tabs on the bottom. Oh, that's another thing you have to do on these. We turn this over, they almost always have this cardboard shield, and this one looks like it's been removed once before because a couple of the nuts are missing. It's important to make sure that this is in place when you're finished, because tube-based sets have high voltages in them, and you certainly don't want to have the solder side of the board exposed, because everything in these sets is metal. You've got an aluminum or steel chassis, you've got a steel wall housing, everything's metal, and with the high voltages, one slip and poof, there you go. So we'll clean this up. You can see how dirty it gets here, so we'll clean all that up also. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up the chassis and replace the replaceable components, and this should be a fairly, hopefully, quick rebuild, and I'll get back to you as soon as I have something to show you. Okay, so I've done a little work on the 2051, and I wanted to show you just a couple things that I discovered. First, just as a point of interest, so this is one of the original, these are referred to as tubular capacitors because they're tubular shaped. These are epoxy capacitors, and this is an original one. and this is its modern replacement. These are both identical values. They're both 0.047 microfarad at 600 volts DC, and this one is the same. The numbers are really small. It's kind of hard to read. So just to show you how things have changed in 50 years, this one I guess is probably about 1/5 the size of the original ones, which actually makes it kind of easy because fitting these in isn't much of a problem. But let me show you two other things I found on the chassis that will need to be addressed. So what you're looking at here are two of the tube sockets. This is the socket for the 12AX7, which is the preamp tube. And this socket down here is for the 50C5, which is the power output tube for the amplifier. And it may be a little bit hard to see in the video, but these are plastic sockets, and this one is in good shape. It's mounted solidly and the plastic is in good condition. This one down here is a whole different matter. One, the plastic that the socket's made out of has degraded a whole lot. It's sort of worn away from the heat that the tube produces, and there's lots and lots of little bitty cracks in the plastic body of the socket, and if you wiggle it, it's not loose on the board. It's not a soldering problem. It's that the plastic has worn away enough that you can see how this one doesn't really move. This one moves around a whole lot. This is one of the problems with sets like these. It's heat related and age related. This socket's going to need to be replaced, otherwise it may fail in the future, and then you can have bad connections in the socket when you plug the tube into it, and that can cause intermittent operation, or it can cause a failure because you can't have loose connections. So this is a problem. This is primarily heat and age related, so this has to be replaced. Let me show you another thing I found on the bottom of the board that's a common problem with these also. So we're looking at the bottom side of the circuit board now, and this area right here is the area underneath one of the tube sockets. And if you look carefully, you might be able to see how this area is quite a bit darker than, say, this area over here. The discoloration is caused by 50+ years of heat that the tube radiates out when the set is turned on, and this is the center of the tube socket, and then you have the pin connections that go around in a circle. The problem that this creates is that sometimes it degrades the fiberglass circuit board. I've actually had these where it's so bad that the socket, you could literally push it through the board with your thumb, and when sets are that bad off, it's pretty much a lost cause. You really can't repair it if the board integrity is damaged that badly. But another problem you have with this is, for instance, these solder points here. These are underneath the volume control and on-off switch for this set, and although it may be a little bit hard to see, each and every one of these 4 solder points here, 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 and here, the solder joints are all cracked. They're cracked around the point where the terminals from the switch assembly itself come through the board and then are soldered onto the pads, and this happens for 2 reasons. Part of it is it's the heating and cooling cycle over 50 years as the set is turned on and off, and because the solder because the terminal connections that come off the switch are a large metal tab, they have much more mass than the solder point on the circuit board, so the metal cools at different rates as the set heats and cools, and that causes it to crack. It also could be a stress-related crack from all of the twisting of the control to change the volume and twisting of the switch to turn it on and off over the years, and that can be physical stress on the joints also. And this is not uncommon. I've had a lot of NuTone tube-based intercoms where you have to go through and touch up 25% of all the solder joints on the board because they've all cracked from heat and age. So it's just another thing that has to be looked at very carefully. Alright, some time has passed and this little 2051's almost finished. What I've got here, I've got it sort of jury-rigged up on the workbench to test it out before I put it back into the faceplate. I've replaced the tubular capacitors. I've cleaned all the controls. I replaced the one tube socket, and I have all of the tubes back in place. Surprisingly enough, on this unit, the only tube that was bad that needed to be replaced was the 50C5, which is the power output tube. All of the other tubes tested at 85% or better, so they didn't really need to be replaced. I've got it set up sort of on a temporary AM antenna here. One of the things I decided to do was, for the multi-can or multi-section can capacitor, which originally was mounted on the board here, I realized that the new one, because it was larger, wasn't going to be a good fit. So I sort of took a page from other NuTone models, and I wired up the bottom of it with individual wires, which are then soldered into the correct spots on the circuit board, and then this will be mounted in a bracket on the chassis, which I'll show you how that looks when I'm all done. So right now it's powered up and it's warmed up, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's warmed up in a second. So we can go ahead and flip the radio on.
Family support keeps me strong. Together, we're rising
And we have
above heart failure.
We have good volume.
And the ball hitting the 3 home runs and all that.
And we have reception that's consistent with AM reception here in the shop, especially sort of on a jury-rig antenna. So the tuner seems to be working well. We have plenty of volume. This is our master station speaker or volume adjustment switch. So it's on high now. We can turn it off. We turn this one down. We turn it on low. That's low. We have off and high. The intercom also works. This station plays.
Story time is critical for brain development, but too many kids without books are missing out.
I've tested the phono input. It works correctly. The intercom does work. There will be feedback, so prepare yourselves. Oops. You can hear the sound coming out of the remote, and then sound coming out of this one. On final testing, I will hook up a door speaker to it just to make sure the door speaker works correctly also. So it seems to function properly, which is nice. One of the things that you have to be careful of on older sets like this is you can probably see here on the speaker cone, it looks kind of striped, or there's actually little faded dashes in it. These correspond with the punch louvers in the grill. When this was new, the cone would have been black, and it's obviously has faded out a lot over the last 50 some years. And what I'm going to do with this, the paper on this is very, very thin and very, very brittle. So before I finish this setup, I will give this a coating of the wet look. It's not so much for the waterproofing or the UV light inhibiting that it gives you, but it helps reinforce the paper so it won't have a tendency to tear. When cones get really old like this, the edges are kind of folded, so they're pleated, and it has a tendency to be thin in the folded area, and then it'll begin to tear over time, and then it doesn't sound very good. So that's sort of a preventative thing. So this one's almost done. I have to put the chassis back together and then do the speaker cone, mount the big capacitor here, and I'll show you how that looks, and we'll be good to go for final testing. That's all for today. So I almost forgot. Here's a view of the tubes when they're powered up. I've got all the lights in the shop turned off, and these are, you can see the glowing in the tubes. There's one right here and another one right here. You can actually see them on the camera better than you can in real life because it picks up the heat better. Here we have this one. This is the 50C5 power tube. This is the 12AX7, and down here this is the 35W4, which is the rectifier tube. So you can see how they glow when the power is on. The glowing part, there, it's the heater in the tube, In the first video I did about this set, I talked a little about the fundamental construction of a tube, and the heater is a key part to how it works, and that's what the glow is. It's the heater inside the tube. So I have a friend of mine, he always says real radios only have tubes that glow. So tubes are kind of cool when you see them that way, but the byproduct of it after 50 or more years is the heat really takes its toll on everything else. So next section will be final testing. Hi, I'm back. All right, so the work on this 2051, 2054 is now complete. I went ahead and reassembled it. I have done some testing on it as I went to make sure it worked well before I put the chassis back in the faceplate. The faceplate has been all washed and cleaned, so it looks a lot better than it did when it was new, or when it first came in. And I've got it hooked up with a single 2027 inside remote speaker, and I've already tested it with a door speaker. On these older 3-wire systems, the inside stations and the door stations are actually functionally the same. The only difference is the front entry door speaker doesn't have a volume control, but it would be controlled by one of the room control switches on the front of the master station. And if you have the door speaker in the on position, you do hear the radio play out on the front porch, which is kind of an old school way of doing it. So I've already got this powered up. I've got it hooked up on my Variac with my watt meter, and I've been monitoring it, and it seems to be drawing about 45 watts, which is pretty much what we're looking for. And it's all warmed up. You have to remember with tube sets that when you first turn them on, you have to wait for the tubes to warm up, and it can take anywhere from 30 to seconds to a minute before they warm up enough that the set will work properly. So it's already warmed up. It's been on for about an hour or so. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the volume up.
KNVR.com/events. This KNVR viewing party sponsored.
This would be, it's just labeled as volume. This is what we in today's world would call system volume. It adjusts the maximum level that any of the speakers connected to the system will play at. And then over here we have the master speaker volume switch, which can either be off, low, or high. It's not adjustable with a variable knob. So we'll go ahead and set this.
And it's eligible for an IRA.
We'll turn our 2027 down for a minute. So that's on the high setting. We have off and low.
Getting only 2 to 3% return on your
And we only have AM radio, there's no FM, but if we move down the dial,
13, be exact. Let's go back to Derek Smith in case...
No, that's what I'm saying. She was a better actress.
O viendo el programa, ya están aquí en Santa Clara.
Clock down, the words kept making play after play. Then I think the Thunder...
I think we'll go back up to...
What's her name?
Julie Andrews.
Thank you, Julie Andrews.
Dame Judy Andrews. Dame Julie Andrews.
So that's AM 810, that's the strongest station in the Bay Area. So we'll go ahead, I have the master speaker turned off, I'm going to turn the 2027 up.
No, you will not.
Oh my goodness.
No,
I
you
wish
will
you could
not.
have seen
And we have plenty of volume there.
Tweak out. Like,
This is connected
not be okay.
to room switch number 1. So when the switch is in the right hand position, you have radio and intercom. If you move it to the center, it turns it off. And if you push it to the left, it puts it in listen in, or what we would call monitor. And if I turn this back on,
Sound of
But what about
music.
the live action Beauty and the Beast that they're going to do with Emma
I
Watson?
reject all of it, totally. I don't
I think Emma Watson will do great in that. 'Cause
we get a little
what's
feedback
whatchamacallit?
because
they did
the speakers are so close to each other, so that's fine.
Gerard Butler.
We'll put it back on radio intercom.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to flip it over to the phono input, so we don't have the radio, but we will test the intercom separately. There will be feedback. So that's calling out. and that's calling out from the master. One of the things about these early 3-wire NuTone systems is if you have the radio playing, oops.
Here, like I like to get into some Rogers.
And you go to activate the intercom.
Don't remake Mary Poppins.
It does cut off the radio at the station that the call is being initiated from, but it does not on the rest of the station. So the intercom call
No way.
There's the throwdown.
is playing through the stations along with the radio. It doesn't mute the radio on the remote station, so it's a little more confusing to use, but that's the way systems were designed back in the 60s. So this set seems to be in good working order now. I'm going to finish it up, put it together, ship it back out to the customer so they can enjoy it. That's all for today. I hope you found the rebuild of this 2051 interesting. If you have an early NuTone tube-based intercom system and you need to have it repaired, you can contact me through our email or through our website. I hope you found this video to be interesting and perhaps helpful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube, and if you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments down below. That's all for today. See you on the next video.